So today video topic is about loop. So what is loop or iteration? Iteration or loops mean when we repeat a same work or same thing again and again for some time, it is known as loop. Suppose fan, then the fan will rotate in the clockwise direction. It never rotate in the anti-clockwise direction. Maybe sometimes it is rotate in clockwise direction, or in sometimes it may rotate in anti-clockwise direction, but not in this pattern. Actually fan is not working, it is always move in the clockwise direction. So it repeat the same clockwise direction rotation again and again. So it is a kind of example of loop. And the loop will start when we just switch on the power, and the fan will be going stop, or the loop will be stop when the switch of the power, okay, cut off the power. So in every loop, to initiate it, it has a initial value or condition, and to it will be stopped at a certain condition. So loop is nothing but iteration or repetition of a same work again and again, but you must remember the repetition of same work, not the different work. If it is different work, then it is never be a loop. If it is repeat the same work again and again, then it is a loop. Now loop are categorized in three types, and they are for loop, while loop, and do while loop. They are basically categorized according to their architectural difference or syntactical difference. Their working techniques are different maybe, but they can implement in the same program for the same purpose. Now let's start with the first one, is the for loop. As I already mentioned that every loop must contain some element, and these are, first one is initial value or condition. It means from where actually this loop or iteration will start, okay. And the second condition, second thing is the final value or condition. It means the up to which limit the loop will execute. And the third one is the reassign or reinitialize the value by increasing the value or decreasing the value. So increment or decrement. So these three things always be present in any kind of loop, maybe in for loop and while loop, and as well as in case of the do while loop. These three things always be present in any kind of loop, okay. Now start with the syntax of the for loop. So this is the syntax of for loop. So you can see in the very first line, all the three elements which is basically necessary for any kind of loop is already included, okay. In first one is initial value. It means from where actually loop is being started, and then after giving semicolon and then give the final value or final condition, it means which up to which limit this loop will execute. Now after this, the increment or decrement, okay. So maybe the value may be increase or maybe decrease, okay. Increment or decrement completely depend upon the question or the program actually needed, which one is actually needed for this particular program. So maybe increment occur or decrement occur, but I am here writing here only one thing, that increment decrement, not the operator what actually being used. So increment decrement means it is not mandatorily you are going to write here the increment decrement operations by using the increment decrement operator. You can use or change the value or increase or decrease the value in any other means. It never reflect that you must always be used the increment decrement operator. You can use the increment decrement operator in this place, but you can also use the other types of increment or decrement factors, okay. And then after giving the opening braces, and then within the closing brace, and within the opening and closing brace write down the statement. Here the statement is going to write, which is basically going to repeat again and again. It means which statement actually basically iterated many times. This statement is going to write in this portion. So this is the syntax of the for loop. Now come to the point of the while loop. The syntax of the while loop is already written in this board. So in the very first slide, before starting the while loop, we have to give the initial value or initial condition before starting the loop. Okay, and then after write the while, and within the bracket you have to write the final value or final condition. That means the final limit up to which the loop will iterate or loop will execute. And then after giving the opening brace and closing brace, and within the opening brace and closing brace, first we have to write the statement which are actually going basically iterated, and then after writing all the statements which are actually basically repeated again and again, writing all the statement, then we are going to write the increment or decrement. Okay, so or reassign the value in this case, right? And as in the syntax, I am just using the angular bracket. It reflects or it means that you have to write the original value. So in the program, whenever we are going to write the this while loop, we never use this angular brackets. Okay, we only use this bracket and these braces. This angular bracket means in syntax you have to write the original value when you are going to implement this syntax in the program. Now come to the point of the do while loop. In case of do while loops, you can see the syntax is like this. In the very first line, before starting the do while loop, you have to initialize or give the initial value or initial condition, and then after you write the do, and then after giving the opening brace, and then you just write down the statement which are actually going to repeat it, and then after you have to write the increment or decrement things, means the value either increase or either decrease, or it means that reassigning the value, and then after giving the closing braces, and after writing the closing brace, you have to write the while, and after while you have to write the final value within this bracket, and after completing this you have to must write this semicolon. Must to remember that in between these three loops there is no semicolon actually basically used in this portion. In the statement portion or reassigning statement, you must to use the semicolon, but in syntax, though no semicolon actually basically used in the previous for and while loop syntax, but in case of the do while loop we must to use the semicolon at the end of this statement, end of this syntax. Now the initial value is given before the do condition, and the final value is being checked at the very end of the condition. So this is the basically syntax of the do while loop. Okay, according to the architectural differences between the loops are basically categorized in two types, and they are entry control loop and exit control loop. Okay, entry control loop means when the loop is the final condition is being checked at the very first time when the loop will going to execute. It means in the first at the entry point, the loop will check the final condition or final value, it is true or false. If it is true, then loop will execute. Otherwise, if it is false, then loop will not going to execute. But in case of the exit control loop, the final condition or final value is being checked at the very end of the loop. So after entering the loop, after executing one time, the final condition is being checked. So in case of the entry control loop, if the final condition or final value is not true at the for the very first time, then loop will not execute for a single time. Okay, so loop will execute 0 times, only 0 times. It means loop will not execute. But in case of exit control loop, if though the condition is false, though the final condition is not matched, the condition is false, completely false, then after also, as the final condition is being checked at the very end of the loop, so the exit control loop will execute minimum one time though the condition is false. So this is the basic difference between the entry control loop and exit control loop. Entry control loop never execute when the condition is false, but exit control loop execute minimum one time though the condition is false. The example of the entry control loop is for and while, and example of the exit control loop is do while.